Rosalino Chalino Sanchez Felix. On the night of May 15, 1992, a singer was performing at the Salon Bugambilias in Culiacan, Sinaloa, in front of a packed crowd of locals, traffickers, and tourists who had driven in from Tijuana to see him. He was 31 years old and the biggest name in narco-corridos in either country. Somewhere in the middle of his set, a man in the audience reached up and handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, he read it, he wiped his forehead, looked at the crowd for a long second, and then he crumpled the paper into his fist and kept singing. 5 hours later, he was dead. 2 farmers found his body at sunrise the next morning, beside an irrigation canal off Federal Highway 15, just outside the city. His wrists carried rope marks, he was blindfolded, and he had been shot twice in the back of the head, the way professionals do it when they want to leave a message. His name was Rosalino Sanchez Felix. The world knew him as Chalino, and more than 30 years later, no one has ever been arrested, no one has ever been charged, and no one outside that room knows what was written on the note. He was born on a ranch called Las Flechas, in a poor farming village outside Culiacan, the youngest of a large family whose father died when he was 6. At 15, he shot a man who had assaulted his sister and fled north, working as a coyote in Tijuana before crossing into the United States and ending up on a relative's couch in Inglewood, California. His older brother Armando was murdered in a Tijuana hotel in 1984, and that loss was the thing that turned him into a songwriter. He wrote his first corrido for Armando, and then he started writing them for other people. Drug traffickers locked up alongside him during a short jail stay paid him in cash, watches, and pistols to write songs about their lives, and he kept doing that work after he got out. A small label in Long Beach called Cintas Aquario, run by Pedro Rivera, whose children Jenny and Lupillo would later become superstars in their own right, began recording him on a cheap cassette deck and shipping the tapes through swap meets up and down the West Coast. His voice was off-key, his delivery was almost a bark, and none of that mattered. What he sang felt real in a way polished singers couldn't fake, and within a few years, his fans were calling him the king of the corrido. In January of 1992, while performing at the Plaza Los Arcos in Coachella, California, an audience member named Eduardo Gallegos climbed onto the stage and shot him twice in the chest, puncturing a lung. Chalino pulled a pistol from his waistband and fired back, wounding the man. His accordionist was hit in the exchange. He survived the attack, and his record team begged him to stay in California. 4 months later, he went home to Sinaloa anyway. The Salon Bugambilias show on May 15th ran long into the early morning. A video of the moment the note arrived has circulated online for years. He reads it, the smile drops off his face, and he looks out over the crowd, says nothing, and goes back to the song he had been singing, a ballad called Alma Enamorada. He never tells anyone what the message said. After midnight, he left the venue with 2 of his brothers, a cousin, and several young women who had come to the show. Their vehicle was pulled over on the highway by armed men in SUVs who flashed badges, identified themselves as state police, and said their commander wanted a word with him. He stepped out of the car and went with them. By sunrise, it was over. There has never been an arrest, and there has never been an indictment. Theories have circulated for 3 decades, ranging from a cartel hit ordered in retaliation for one of his corridos to a settling of accounts with someone from his past in Tijuana. None of them have ever been confirmed. His producer Pepe Garza has said over the years that Chalino didn't crown himself king of the corrido, that his fans gave him the name because everything in his songs had actually happened to him, and that this was the same thing that got him killed. His son Adan tried to carry the music forward and died in a car crash on a Sinaloan highway at 19. The genre Chalino invented is now bigger than at any point in its history, and the biggest stars in the world, singers like Peso Pluma and Natanael Cano and Junior H, name him as the foundation of everything they do. He is the original figure in this story, and he is also the template for almost every name that follows it, because nearly every one of them ends in an irrigation ditch, a parking lot, or the back of a vehicle on a desert highway. The man Chalino is most often credited with influencing directly was a young singer from Sonora who grew up listening to those cassette tapes, modeled his style on them, and who, 14 years after Chalino's body was found, would make the same mistake of singing the wrong song in the wrong city. Valentin Elizalde Valencia, El Gallo de Oro. If you had to name the moment regional Mexican music turned permanently dangerous, you could pick the one Chalino died in 1992, or you could pick the one Valentin Elizalde walked into a fairground in Reynosa on the night of November 25, 2006, and chose to perform a song called A Mis Enemigos. By every reliable account, that song was understood as a message from Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's Sinaloa cartel, directed at the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas, who controlled Reynosa. Elizalde sang it inside their city, in front of their men, and then he walked off stage and got in his black Chevrolet Suburban. He never made it out of the parking lot. Roughly 75 rounds tore through the vehicle within seconds of him leaving the venue. His driver, Reynaldo Ballesteros, and his manager, Mario Mendoza Grajeda, were both killed instantly. Valentin Elizalde, 27 years old, was hit close to 20 times. His cousin Fausto, riding in the back seat, was the only person in the SUV to survive. The Tamaulipas State Prosecutor's Office said within days that the investigation was being treated as a hit ordered by drug traffickers. He had been born February 1, 1979, in a small village near Echojoa, Sonora, the son of the singer Lalo Elizalde. He grew up in Guadalajara and Guasave, learned banda and norteño from his father, and built a career around romantic songs like Vete Ya, Ebrio de Amor, and Soy Así. By his mid-20s, he was one of the most beloved figures in regional Mexican music, packing arenas across northern Mexico and the American Southwest. The corrido A Mis Enemigos was the song that ended him. According to reporting that has held up for almost 2 decades, the man who ordered the hit was in the audience that night, at the palenque of the Expo Feria. His name was Jaime Gonzalez Duran. His nickname was El Hummer, and he was a founding member of Los Zetas and the Plaza Boss for Reynosa. The Mexican homicide investigation went nowhere, but in June of 2025, nearly 19 years later, Gonzalez Duran was sentenced in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia to 35 years in prison for drug trafficking and ordered to forfeit $792 million, the estimated value of the narcotics he had moved across his career. That conviction did not include Elizalde's murder, and no conviction for Elizalde's murder has ever been secured anywhere. That's not a typo, by the way. The man widely understood by federal investigators on both sides of the border to have ordered one of the most famous cartel hits in modern Mexican history will spend most of the rest of his life behind bars for a different set of crimes entirely. The Elizalde case, in any official sense, remains unresolved. His brother Francisco has more recently disputed the lyrics theory, suggesting in interviews that the real motive was a personal one, involving a relationship with a trafficker's partner. The family disagrees among themselves about what is true. What is not in dispute is the location, the venue, the song, and what happened in the parking lot afterward. The contemporaneous position of the Tamaulipas prosecutors at the time was that drug trafficking was the motive, and nothing in the years since has contradicted that. After his death, the video of the Reynosa shooting circulated on early internet forums and is widely credited as one of the first viral cartel snuff videos of the digital era. His funeral in Guasave drew thousands. The song A Mis Enemigos became one of the most streamed corridos of the next decade, in part because of what it cost the man who sang it. 6 months after Elizalde was buried, a Duranguense singer from Indiana with no narco corridos in his catalog at all, no Sinaloa ties, and no cartel connections of any kind, walked off stage in Morelia and made the mistake of agreeing to leave the venue early. Sergio Gomez. The thing that makes the Sergio Gomez case different from almost every other one in this video is that he never wrote a narco corrido in his life, not a single one. Cartels de la Sierra was a Duranguense band built around romantic songs, danceable rhythms, and ballads about heartbreak. And by 2007, they were one of the biggest groups in the entire genre. He had been nominated for a Grammy. His band was in the middle of recording its next album, and none of that mattered. On the night of December 1st, 2007, Cartels performed at the Estadio Morelos in Morelia, Michoacán, alongside Joan Sebastian. Around an hour after midnight, Sergio Gomez left the stadium in a vehicle with two promoters, Victor Hugo Sanchez and Javier Rivera. Near the Salamanca exit on the highway out of the city, an armed group intercepted them. The promoters were released within hours, but Gomez was not. His body was found later the same day on the Morelia-Chiquimitillo road on the outskirts of the city, identified by a Black Panther tattoo on his left arm. He was 34. He was born June 2, 1973 in Ciudad Hidalgo, Michoacán, and migrated to the United States as a young laborer. He founded Cartels in Chicago in 2003 with a group of fellow Mexican immigrants, lived in a quiet suburb of Indianapolis called Avon, and treated the band like the second chance at life that it was for him. He had received phone threats in the weeks before the show, warning him not to perform in Michoacán, and had played the date anyway. The Michoacán State Prosecutor's Office, through its Deputy Attorney General Maria Elena Hernandez Cornejo, described what was done to him in unusually direct terms. He had been beaten severely, strangled, and burned before he died. The autopsy listed asphyxiation as the cause of death, with multiple traumas consistent with a prolonged assault. The leading hypothesis, drawn from Mexican federal files and testimony from two protected witnesses, both of them former gunmen for La Familia Michoacana, was that the group's founder, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, known across the region as El Chayo, had personally ordered the killing. Their account was that Cartels had performed at events tied to La Familia's rival Los Zetas, and that the murder was retaliation, an act intended to send a message to every musician who played for the wrong side of a war they hadn't enlisted in. No one was ever convicted of his murder. El Chayo himself was killed by Mexican federal forces in 2014 on his second supposed death, after Mexican authorities had once mistakenly declared him dead in 2010. The case has been formally open and effectively dormant for going on 2 decades. 6 days after his body was found, the Latin Recording Academy announced his posthumous Grammy nomination. His widow accepted on his behalf, and there is video, if you want to find it, of her standing on the stage in a black dress, holding the trophy that was supposed to have been the high point of his life. And somehow, it gets worse, because what Gomez's case proved is that you didn't have to be a narco-corrido singer to die like one. You just had to be a regional Mexican performer whose tour schedule put you, on the wrong night, in a venue someone with a gun had decided belonged to them. That is exactly the lesson that another singer, almost 3 years later, would refuse to accept until the day he died. José Sergio Vega Quamea, El Shaka. A few hours before he was murdered on a Sinaloan highway, Sergio Vega sat for a national television interview and laughed about the rumors that he was already dead. The internet had been claiming all morning that he had been killed. He went on camera, looking healthy and slightly amused, and explained that he was alive, that he was on his way to a concert in Alhue, and that he wished people would stop spreading the story. The interviewer asked if he was afraid. He said that of course he had a little fear, that he sang strong material and a lot of corridos, and that all you could do in that line of work was commend yourself to God. The interview aired the night of June 26, 2010. He was killed roughly 2 hours later. He had been born September 12, 1969, in a tiny ejido called Hornos near Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, the eighth of 13 children, and he had built his early career playing the bars of Phoenix, Arizona, with his brothers as Los Hermanos Vega before going solo. His stage name El Shaka came from the Zulu warrior of the same name, a man, he liked to say, who feared nothing. By 2010, he was a fixture of the genre, with hits including Dueño de Ti, Quién es usted, and Cara Lavada. That evening, he was driving his red Cadillac north on Federal Highway 15, near the San Miguel toll booth in Los Mochis, on his way to perform in the municipality of Angostura. Around 8:45 p.m., a truck pulled alongside him and gunmen opened fire. Roughly 30 rounds were fired, and 6 of them struck him. His vehicle ran off the road, and after it stopped, one of the gunmen walked up to the driver's side window and delivered a final shot to the head. His assistant in the passenger seat survived. The shooters left the scene and have never been identified. The case has never been solved, with no arrests, no charges, and no firm motive on record. The most cited investigative thread comes from a federal preliminary inquiry filed the following year, in which a financial operator for Héctor L. H. Beltrán Leiva, a man identified as Ismael Coronel Siqueiros, gave testimony suggesting that L.H. had been romantically involved with a singer, and that Vega had become a problem because of it. El Universal noted, when that file became public, that the authorities never verified the alleged relationship. The testimony exists, but the corroboration does not. His manager Ana Luisa Gomez told the Spanish newspaper El País after the killing that Sergio had not been afraid, that he had been driving with no security and no weapon in his own Cadillac, and that she did not believe what happened to him was a settling of accounts. She offered no alternative theory. Nobody has, in the years since, offered one that holds up. The line from his final interview that everyone went back and re-watched after the news of his death broke was about fear. He said he didn't think singers in his line of work were afraid of dying. He thought what they were afraid of was the way it would happen. What happened to Sergio Vega is the thing every regional Mexican performer in 2010 understood could happen to any of them, on any night, for reasons they would never be told. One of the artists who knew that better than anyone, because he had already lived through his own version of it, was a 21-year-old corrido singer from Pasadena, California, who, almost a year earlier, had walked away from an ambush that killed 2 of the men sitting in the SUV with him. Gerardo Ortiz. 2 men died inside the gray Suburban on the night of March 20, 2011. Gerardo Ortiz walked away from it. 14 years later, in a federal courtroom in Los Angeles, he would plead guilty to a conspiracy charge tied to performing concerts for a promoter the United States Treasury had designated as a front for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Walking away from the ambush, in the end, did not mean walking away from the world that had tried to kill him. He had been born in 1989 in the Pasadena area of California, moved to Culiacan with his family at age 5, and grew up in the heart of Sinaloan narco country. His first album dropped when he was 8 years old. By the time he was 21, he was one of the top-selling regional Mexican artists in the world, with 6 #1 albums on Billboard's top Latin chart and a touring schedule that took him across both countries. On the night of March 20th, 2011, after a performance at the Mega Palenque in Villa de Alvarez, Colima, his gray Suburban with Jalisco plates, was ambushed on the 3rd Peripheral Ring Road. Gunmen carrying AK-47s opened fire. His manager and cousin Ramiro Caro, 31 years old, an American citizen, was killed in the attack. His driver, Abel Valle Rosales, 59, was also killed. A woman in the vehicle was wounded. Ortiz and his father survived, reportedly because their security escorts engaged the attackers and bought them enough time. Investigators recovered Kalashnikov casings from the scene. No one was ever publicly named, charged, or prosecuted for the attack. Ortiz later wrote a corrido in honor of his cousin. His style of music, what people in the industry call movimiento alterado, leaned hard into the violent and stylized side of narco-corrido culture. Songs like El Ejecutor described cartel enforcers in detail. In 2016, Mexican authorities detained him in Guadalajara on a charge of apología del delito, the glorification of crime, after the music video for his song Fuiste Mía depicted him appearing to torture and burn an unfaithful partner. The video was pulled, his other videos were removed from YouTube en masse, and he was banned from performing in entire regions of Mexico. He posted bail and kept working. The American case that came years later was a different problem entirely. In May of 2025, Ortiz pleaded guilty in a United States federal court to a single conspiracy charge tied to 19 concerts he had performed for a promoter called Galistica Diamante, also doing business as Ticket Premier. The Treasury Department had designated that promoter in 2018 as a financial front for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The FBI had personally warned Ortiz about the designation in Phoenix on April 19th of that year. 9 days later, he played another date for the same company anyway, and 18 more concerts followed. He testified at trial against Angel Del Villar, the chief executive of Del Records, who was convicted on March 27, 2025, on 10 counts of violating the Kingpin Act +1 conspiracy count, and who was sentenced to 48 months in federal prison and a $2 million fine. Ortiz himself was sentenced on November 19, 2025, by Judge Mame Ewusi Mensah Frimpong. He received 3 years of supervised release, no prison time, and a multi-million-dollar fine. Outside the courthouse, he told reporters that too many things had been said about him, too many lies, and that he had told the truth. You'd think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Or rather, nobody who could have stopped him from getting on those stages did so in time to matter, because the industry around him was structured in a way that made saying no almost impossible. His own attorneys at sentencing argued that he had been pressured by his label to keep playing the dates, that turning down those concerts would have cost him his career, and that the cartel-linked promoters had effectively cornered the high end of the regional Mexican touring circuit by 2018. He is, as of late 2025, the only living name on this list. The 2 men sitting next to him in the Suburban in Colima are not. The chief executive who built the label around him is going to federal prison, and the promoter at the center of the case has been sanctioned. The music keeps playing, the streams keep climbing, and the next generation of corridistas keeps signing the contracts. If you're enjoying this video and you're not subscribed yet, take a second to hit that button. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Combo, Colombia. On the morning of January 25th, 2013, a man covered in dust and dirt walked out of the brush in the Mexican state of Nuevo León and flagged down the first vehicle he could find. He told the driver he had been part of a band that played a private party at a bar called La Carreta the night before, in the small municipality of Hidalgo, about 25 miles north of Monterrey. He said that around 10 armed men had stormed the venue in the early hours of the morning, herded all 18 musicians and crew into vehicles, and driven them out to a clearing in the countryside. He was the only one who had gotten away. He led authorities to a well in the neighboring municipality of Mina. By the end of that day, 17 of his bandmates would be pulled out of it. The band had been together for about 3 years and had built a regional following playing Colombian-style vallenato and cumbia, the kind of upbeat folk music that fills weddings and small-town festivals. Their repertoire was romantic, with no corridos, no songs about traffickers, and no veiled references to capos that might explain a hit. They played for whoever booked them. On the night of January 24, 2013, they had been booked for a private party at La Carreta in Hidalgo, Nuevo León, about a 40-minute drive north of Monterrey. The party went normally until the early hours of January 25th, when roughly 10 armed men entered the venue, separated the band members and crew from the guests, and forced 18 of them into a convoy of vehicles. The kidnappers drove them out of Hidalgo and into the neighboring municipality of Mina, an empty stretch of brush country that had been a favorite dumping ground for Los Zetas during the worst years of the Northeast Cartel War. One band member, somewhere in the confusion of being taken from one vehicle to another, slipped his captors and hid in the brush until daylight. He was the one who led police back to the well. When investigators arrived, they recovered 17 bodies, 13 were musicians, 3 were assistants, and 1 was a sound engineer. Among the dead was the band's Colombian-born keyboardist, Jainer Ivan Cuellar Perez, who had moved to Mexico for the work. The bodies showed signs of torture and bullet wounds. The state security spokesman, Jorge Domene, told reporters within hours that the main line of investigation was Los Zetas, and that the killings were believed to be retaliation for the band having played at events tied to the rival Gulf Cartel. In February of 2013, Nuevo León authorities arrested a man named Edgar Alberto de la Garza Trevino, an alleged Zetas lookout, on suspicion of providing intelligence in the lead-up to the kidnapping. He was not believed to have been directly involved in the killings themselves. Investigators also linked the orchestration of the massacre to José Isidro Cruz Villarreal, known as El Pichilo, a regional Zetas figure who has been the subject of multiple arrest warrants since. The case has never produced a homicide conviction. What the Combo Colombia massacre established, more than any single killing on this list, is that the rule wasn't actually about the music. It was about geography. The Zetas controlled certain plazas, the Gulf Cartel controlled others, and if a band played for the wrong side on the wrong night, in the wrong town, they became a message regardless of what they were singing. Put plainly, the 18 musicians of Combo Colombia were vallenato players who had probably never given a thought to which cartel ran the bar they were booked in, and none of that protected them. 3 months later, on the other side of the border, in a citrus grove just outside Mission, Texas, irrigation workers would find the body of a man who had grown up on the opposite side of that question. Jesus Chuy Quintanilla. On the morning of April the 25th, 2013, irrigation workers in a citrus grove just north of Mission, Texas, found a Chevrolet Tahoe with a body lying beside it in a pool of blood. The man had been shot in the head and the neck sometime the previous night. He was a Palmview, Texas resident, a 50-something corrido singer named Jesus Quintanilla, And anyone in Hidalgo County who knew his real biography understood why he had ended up in that field. Before he was a musician, he had spent 2 decades working as a Mexican judicial police officer. His stage name was La Mera Ley del Corrido, which translates roughly to the true law of the corrido, and the joke embedded in the name was that he had actually been the law before he started singing about it. He was also the younger brother of Beto Quintanilla, one of the founding figures of the modern Mexican corrido, who had died of a heart attack in 2007. Across more than 40 albums of his own, Chue had moved fluidly between songs about horse races and cockfights and explicit corridos about the Gulf Cartel, including ballads about the hunt for Jaime González Durán, the same El Hummer who had been connected to the Valentin Elizalde killing 6 years earlier. He sang for the people on every side of the border war, and he made no secret of it. On the evening of April 24, 2013, Quintanilla left his home in Palmview around 8 p.m. and told family he was going to meet someone. He never came back. Hidalgo County Sheriff Lupe Trevino told reporters at the scene that the singer had been shot at least twice, once in the head and once in the neck, and that he appeared to have been killed where his body was found. The Tahoe was still beside him with the keys in it, which made clear whoever had done it was not interested in robbery. The case has never been solved, and no suspect has ever been charged. The Hidalgo County Sheriff's Office still lists the file as open. There is a complication to this story that came out years later in unrelated federal court proceedings. Sheriff Lupe Trevino, the man who had publicly handled the early investigation, would himself be sent to federal prison in 2014 for laundering money for a Huislaco-based trafficker named Tomás El Gallo González. In those proceedings, evidence emerged that Quintanilla had at one point personally witnessed González hand a bribe to Trevino. Whether that connection was the reason Quintanilla was killed has never been proven. But the sheriff who told the public there were no leads in the singer's case turned out to have his own complicated relationship with one of the men in that orbit. Put plainly, the public face of the investigation belonged to someone who would later be convicted of laundering money for the kind of figure who may have had a reason to want the singer silenced. What happened in that citrus grove was, by most accounts, one of the earliest signs that the war over regional Mexican music was no longer something that stopped at the United States border. The corrido culture had crossed years earlier, and the violence around it had finally crossed with it. A year later, in a Chinese restaurant in Sonora, another singer would learn the same lesson during a quiet afternoon lunch. Tomás Eduardo Tovar Rascón, Tito Torbellino. About a year before his death, Tito Torbellino recorded a song called Al que se animó, in which he sang that if they ever came for him with bullets, he wanted to die with valor. On the afternoon of May 29, 2014, he was sitting at a table inside a Chinese restaurant called Red in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, eating with friends and family before a scheduled show the following day. It was around 3 in the afternoon. 2 men walked in, identified him at the table, and shot him 6 times at close range with 9mm pistols. He was 33 years old. He had been born May 24, 1981, in Phoenix, Arizona, to a family with deep roots in Ciudad Obregón. He dropped out of school at 16 to play the accordion full-time and built his band, Tito y su Torbellino, from a garage act into one of the rising names of the Movimiento Alterado scene. He recorded 13 albums, performed a popular duet with Espinoza Paz, and had recently signed a contract with Sony Music. Some of his corridos named real cartel figures, including Joaquin Guzman himself. The shooting at the Red restaurant was clean and quick. His companions at the table were not harmed because he was the only target. He was rushed to a hospital and he died on the way. The Sonora State Prosecutor's Office, the PGJE, opened the case immediately and entertained several theories. One investigative line connected the killing to figures around the Beltran Leyva organization. Another examined a possible tie to a relative of Rafael Caro Quintero named Sajid Emilio Quintero Navidad, known in the press as El Cadete. None of those leads were ever publicly confirmed. What did get confirmed, weeks later, was the identity of one of the material perpetrators. On July 18, 2014, less than 2 months after Torbellino was killed, a Sonora State investigative police agent shot and killed a 26-year-old man named Carlos Montes Pacheco during a separate attack at a private party in Ciudad Obregón. A woman at that party, Blanca Olivia Acosta Encinas, had been wounded by Montes Pacheco before he was killed. When forensic teams matched the ballistics and biometrics from the agent's encounter to the Red Restaurant shooting, they concluded that Montes Pacheco was one of the gunmen who had walked into the restaurant the previous May. The state prosecutor's office released few further details and effectively closed the public file. Who Montes Pacheco had been working for, who had sent him into a Chinese restaurant in the middle of the afternoon to kill a singer eating lunch, was never publicly named. And no, I'm not making that up. One of the most public daylight cartel-style hits in Sonora in 2014 was solved only in the narrowest sense of identifying a shooter, and only because that shooter died less than 2 months later in an unrelated attack. His son, Tito Torbellino Jr., has continued performing under his father's stage name in the years since, and the song his father wrote about dying with valor, the one with the line about taking bullets and meeting them like a man, has become one of the most played tracks in his catalog, in part because of the date stamped under the title. 11 years later, in August of 2025, the same kind of war that killed Tito Torbellino in a restaurant in Sonora would catch up with another singer who had spent his entire adult life writing songs about the men who paid for them. Ernesto Barajas. In late 2024, the lead singer of one of Mexico's biggest narco-corrido bands packed up his life in Culiacan and moved to Jalisco. He told friends and interviewers later that it was a security decision, that what was happening between the factions of the Sinaloa cartel had made his home state unlivable. He thought Jalisco would be safer. On the afternoon of August 19, 2025, 2 men walked up to the auto lot in Zapopan, where he was waiting to receive a shipment of vehicles from Sinaloa, and shot him to death in the parking area. He was 38 years old, and his band, Enigma Norteño, had spent 21 years writing some of the most explicit narco-corridos ever recorded. Ernesto Barajas Serrano was born September 16, 1985, in Culiacan, Sinaloa. He founded Enigma Norteño at 18 and turned it into one of the most commercially successful acts in narco-corrido history, with hits dedicated to specific traffickers. There was album JGL, named for Joaquin Guzman Loera, Los Lujos del R, a corrido about a Sinaloa figure, Maito Gordo, named for one of Guzman's sons, and Van a Querer Más, a song about Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and known by his nickname El Mencho. Barajas always told interviewers that he had no cartel ties of his own, that he had been commissioned to write the songs, and that writing them was simply his job. The threats were a constant. In 2017, a banner appeared in Tijuana threatening him. He later said on his own podcast that the banner had been put up not by a cartel, but by a rival musician trying to scare him out of Tijuana dates. The threat that mattered came in the summer of 2023, when a narco manta signed by the CJNG appeared in Rosarito, Baja California, before a scheduled Enigma Norteño show. The banner warned Barajas to stop feeling protected by Sinaloa cartel operators known as Los Aquiles, and La Rana named the venue he was scheduled to play, and told him to stay out of Baja territory the CJNG considered its own. Enigma Norteño canceled the show on official recommendation. That was 2 years before they got him. On the afternoon of August 19, 2025, Barajas was at an auto pension lot in the Arenales Tapatios area of Zapopan, Jalisco, with his wife and his compadre, José María Cervantes Quintero. They were waiting for vehicles being driven down from Sinaloa to be sold. 2 armed men approached on foot. According to the Jalisco Vice Fiscal Alfonso Gutiérrez Santillan, Barajas was the primary target and absorbed the most rounds in the attack. His compadre was also killed, and an employee at the auto lot was wounded. The case was opened by the Jalisco prosecutor's office with his musical activity listed as the primary investigative line. He had said in interviews earlier that year that he had left Sinaloa because of the violence between the Chapitos and the Mayesa, the 2 factions tearing the cartel apart after the arrest of Ismael El Mayo Zambada in the United States in 2024. He believed Jalisco was a step back from the war. And somehow it got worse, because what he had apparently not factored in was that Jalisco was the home of the same cartel that had told him, 2 years earlier, to stay out of its territory entirely. His killing, just 3 months after another, even more brutal attack on a band in Tamaulipas, marked the beginning of what many in regional Mexican music are now openly calling the worst year in the genre's history. Grupo Fugitivo. Around 8 p.m. on the night of May 25, 2025, a man calling himself Dino phoned the representative of a small Reynosa Norteño band called Grupo Fugitivo and booked them for a private event later that evening in a neighborhood called Riberas de Rancho Grande. 5 people climbed into the band's SUV, 4 musicians and their representative, ranging in age from 20 to 40. 2 hours later, on Avenida Las Palmas, an armed group intercepted them, forced them out of their own vehicle and into another, and drove them out of the city. They were never seen alive again. Grupo Fugitivo had been together for less than 2 years. They had formed in 2023, played covers and regional Mexican music at bars and small parties around Reynosa, and were exactly the kind of working norteño band that takes any booking that comes in. Their last public show had reportedly included a song honoring El Mencho of the CJNG, although how relevant that detail is to what happened to them remains an investigative line rather than an established fact. The 5 missing were Victor Manuel Garza Cervantes, age 21, Francisco Javier Vázquez Osorio, age 20, José Francisco Morales Martínez, age 23, Nemesio Antonio Durán Rodríguez, age 40, and their representative, Livan Ediberto Solís de la Rosa, age 27. Their families immediately reported them missing. Within hours, ransom demands began coming in by phone. Protests blocked the international bridge between Reynosa and Pharr, Texas, as relatives of the missing musicians demanded the federal government act. On May 29th, 4 days after the disappearance, Tamaulipas Attorney General Irving Barrios Mojica confirmed what no one had wanted to confirm. All 5 had been killed. He said the men had been intercepted on Avenida Las Palmas, taken to a brickyard in the Colonia Aquiles Cerdán, killed and incinerated in a kiln. Their remains had been moved roughly 300 meters from the kiln after the fact. Genetic analysis had identified 3 of the victims from bone fragments, and the others had been identified through additional forensic means. The same day, 9 arrests were announced. Within weeks, the case had produced arrest warrants for 13 people. 10 of those named were identified as members of the Gulf Cartel cell known as Los Metros, the dominant faction in Reynosa for most of the past decade. 9 firearms and 2 vehicles were seized as part of the investigation. The Tamaulipas Attorney General's office offered a reward of 1.5 million pesos for 3 suspects who remained at large. Jose Giovanni y Piña Rosales, known as Güero Nietzsche; Mario Lerma Armendariz, known as Chuco, and his relative Francisco Javier Lerma Armendariz, known as Panchito. President Claudia Sheinbaum, in office less than a year, addressed the case publicly and said the Federal Security Cabinet was following it directly. The families of the 5 musicians have continued to publicly dispute aspects of the official account, citing what they describe as a lack of direct evidence and incomplete DNA confirmation. Whether their concerns are well-founded or whether they reflect the grief of relatives who could never accept the worst version of events, the case remains officially closed as a homicide investigation against the suspects in custody. You'd think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Grupo Fugitivo were a cover band with no fame to speak of and no known cartel ties, whose last show reportedly included 1 song about El Mencho. And by the end of the month, the youngest of them had been in the ground for less than a week. The list ends here. Thanks for watching. Click here to see our next video.